Hey everybody. So I've always been really fascinated by things that endure, by things that really last. And it started when I was a kid. I found myself just really drawn to old architecture, the Egyptian ruins, old kind of remnants of the Holy Roman Empire, and being just totally enwrapped in that something could be created that would last not decades, not centuries, but millennia, with such poor tools, and such poor technology. And as I grew and got through my undergraduate and got involved in a startup business, I translated that interest into business and started asking myself a lot of questions about what's different between a business that persists for generations and a business that's sort of a flash in the pan. What's different between Commodore computers and Hewlett-Packard? Between DeLorean Motors and Ford Motor Company. And I've been exposed to this kind of thing for a while. My father's an entrepreneur. I started 3 businesses before me, and I had the very great fortune of working with him in a 4th. And he followed what I would call the blueprint for how technology businesses are created. I think if you talk to many people and say, okay, hey, I want to create a business, I want to get involved in this tech startup, how do I do that? And typically what you're going to hear is okay, so you get a plan or a prototype, you find some investors, you get them involved with the business, and then you work the plan. If the plan is successful, what happens is merger or acquisition. And this is the prototypical way in which businesses are grown, and I think it's the generally accepted way in which, outside of even technology, a lot of people think about, how am I going to start this business? And it's what my dad did. The first 3 businesses he had the fortune to start, he was actually successful, batted 3 for 3, and each one of those business transitions hands at one point. And each time that happened, it was like dropping an anchor behind the business. And depending on how fast the business was going and what it was made of, sometimes it stopped the business, dead in its tracks. Sometimes the business just kind of dragged the anchor for a while, kept going, but it was much slower than it could have been. And at one time, the business kind of came apart at the seams. It wasn't built for that kind of drag. And so it started asking the question, really, is this typical? What happens in mergers and acquisitions outside of the microcosm of my experience? Is this what happens? And my friends that started businesses and followed this path had a similar experience. And what we find, that for me is kind of frightening, is that 70 to 90% of mergers and acquisitions are unsuccessful. That we have this roadmap, for how we say, okay, you're going to start a technology business, you do this, you do this, you do this, and then 70 to 90% of the time it's a dead end. And for me, as kind of a technologist and a geek, that's concerning. And it's the kind of thing that I think means that we need to start a different conversation about how businesses are started. Not have the blueprint, but a blueprint. And I think that what's emerging for me is a different way to do this. Is a kind of a paradigm where rather than using investors as kind of an accelerant to grow a business, rather than starting with a lot of capital and having this explosive growth, vision and a conversation when you're starting a business that says, okay, I want to create a business that endures. I want to have a business that when I step away from this business, it has inertia and a trajectory that's going to outlive me. That like the people that used to design great cathedrals in Europe, when they started designing and drew that cathedral, all they knew with any certainty was that they were not going to survive to see the final embodiment of the vision, something much grander than ourselves. And I hope that the business I'm involved now is my opportunity to take a swing at that and to do something like this. And it's a different mindset, and it's a different mentality, and it's not something that typically enters into the conversation when you say, okay, I want to start a business. Hey, okay, so let's carefully and painfully grow that organically, one brick at a time with no investment and kind of a long 30-year linear growth. That's not typically how we talk about business. Hey, let's shoot for retirement. I'm 22 and I'm going to start this business. But I think it's an interesting alternative, and I think it's important, not because This is Dave's sort of romanticized view of how business should be started, but because I think that it's going to be a key to making us competitive, socially, or societally, and communally. I think for us to stay competitive on a global landscape, we have to think differently, about what it is to invent and what it is to innovate. We're not going to outproduce, other people. We're not going to graduate more engineers and more technologists in the U.S., or here in North Dakota than they will in China or India. We're going to be outproduced in technologists and engineers 20+1 every year forward going. But we're audacious. I mean, we're bold, right? We're different. We're unafraid. And that makes us unique, and that's different. And there's no reason that we can't continue to be, the world leader at bold and audacious. And there's precedent for this. It's not done a lot in technology businesses, but it's certainly been done elsewhere. Mars of M&M candy fame, that was a storefront business started by a guy in his 4th attempt at starting a business, and now they're a global candy giant, generations later, continuing to grow. A lot of these household names, S.C. Johnson, a family company, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ernst & Young, Cargill Corporation. These are privately held, closely held businesses that have grown slowly, over time, building into these giants that are capable, of so much. And I think that capability is really kind of at the crux of it all. For me, there's a place in New Jersey that is sort of the tipping point for me in why this all matters. In the 20s, some geeks in a lab in New Jersey got some funding to play around, and this was a different place. The place was funded by industry. Typically I think when we talk about invention, a lot of people think, it's going to come out of a research university, it's going to come out of a laboratory, it's going to come out of a national lab. And this was Bell Labs. This was industry where people started investing in creating things, with an industrial mindset. I want to create, not fundamental research. I don't just want to push the bounds of some technology. I want to productize something. I don't know what per se. I'm not going to, guide with too heavy a hand. But let's give some people some, fiscal and technological wherewithal to create, and let's see what happens. And over the course of 70 years, Bell Labs produced some things that completely changed everybody's life here. They created the transistor. The transistor ultimately begat integrated circuits and became the things that power all of our phones, our tablets, our computers, our cars, everything that's illuminating the screens here. All that started with a transistor in Bell Laboratories. They created the Unix operating system and the C programming language, from which has been derived every operating system and software language that we use today. They created the laser. They created data networking that really delivered internet to all of our homes for the first time and started the whole internet and information age. And they created solar cells in an effort to explore ways to power things in telecom. So they created all of this stuff that we think is very fundamental and core technologies, and it all came out of private business. And the reason I think that that's tremendously important, the private part of that, is because in public business and in places where people invest in a business, it's difficult to do that. You've got shareholders that have an expectation for a return, and it's difficult to roll up and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. All of our net income this year and next year and the year after, we're going to take a swing at this idea, and if it works, it's going to change the world and it's going to change this business. How likely is it to work? I don't know. That's a really difficult, conversation to have with the board of directors and shareholders. And so where, a lot of this push can come from, a lot of this interesting stuff can come from, it comes from, a place where you've got a closely held business that's grown to a sufficient size that it has the fiscal and technical wherewithal to swing at a problem that if successful, it's going to move the world, just a little bit. And that's a difficult thing to do. And to get there, from a basement, from a storefront, from a garage, to get there, it takes a long, long, long time. And I think that Bell Labs, if you ask me or others, that we'd say that it's in a state of decline. And I don't think we need to replace, Bell Labs, replace, a single center for innovation. I think we need to clone it and mutate it and let it, propagate into something, weird and different, and to do it dozens of times, and then to focus, some of the energy and some of the conversation around starting a business in this country, not on, the roadmap through which we get to, a business in 5 years, but the roadmap through which we get to a business that persists generations. And it doesn't need to be the roadmap, but I think that if we can get this idea of a longer-term outlook in producing a business, something that survives us and survives for generations, if we can get that into the conversation with our friends, our families, our peers about, starting a new enterprise, I think 20, 30, 40 years from now, these businesses, they could change the world. Thank you.